What if I told you that in just 3 days, you could begin to shift the way you see yourself, not through external achievement, but simply by changing how you speak to yourself, not in some magical overnight transformation, but in a deep psychological turning point, where your inner dialogue becomes your greatest source of power instead of your greatest limitation. 3 days, just your voice, just your truth, and everything within begins to listen. The way you speak to yourself shapes your perception of reality. This is not merely a poetic idea, it is a psychological truth. Every thought, every internal monologue becomes part of the lens through which you experience the world. When your inner dialogue is filled with kindness, honesty, and understanding, you lay the groundwork for inner stability and personal development. The internal voice is not separate from who you are, it is you. It is the whisper of your beliefs, the echo of your memories, and the filter through which you interpret experience. Most people go through their lives unaware of how constantly they are speaking to themselves. This voice comments on everything: how you look, how you perform, what you fear and what you desire, and yet, despite its pervasiveness, few pause to examine it. This inner voice is formed early. In childhood, it may begin as the internalization of a parent's tone, a teacher's criticism, or the absence of affirmation. Over time, it becomes automated, looping in the background, guiding feelings and decisions. If you were often corrected harshly or compared to others, your internal voice may default to judgment or self-criticism. If you were encouraged to be curious and self-accepting, your voice may tend toward compassion. But here's the profound realization: regardless of how it began, you can change it. You are not condemned to carry the voice of your past unaltered. You can choose, consciously, how you speak to yourself. Changing your inner dialogue begins with awareness. Catch the moment when you say, "I always mess this up," or "I'm not good enough," and realize that this is not a fact. It's a thought. That thought was learned, and anything learned can be unlearned. When you replace it with, "I'm still learning and that's okay," or "I'm doing my best with what I know," you interrupt the pattern. These new words may feel foreign at first. They may even feel untrue. But with repetition, they take root, and the nervous system begins to respond differently. Where there was anxiety, there is now calm. Where there was self-doubt, there is a quiet courage. The power of the inner voice is not just emotional, it is physiological. Self-criticism activates the same stress response in the body as external threats do. It floods the system with cortisol, disrupts sleep, impairs memory, and weakens the immune system. On the other hand, self-compassion lowers stress, increases resilience, and strengthens motivation. When you speak to yourself with encouragement rather than contempt, your body listens, your brain rewires. You begin to feel safer in your own presence, which allows deeper reflection and better decision-making. Self-talk is not about lying to yourself. It is about choosing which truths to feed. You can acknowledge your imperfections without crucifying yourself for them. You can see your limits without losing sight of your worth. Talking to yourself with clarity, respect, and care does not make you weaker. It makes you stronger. It creates a space within where healing, creativity, and authenticity can emerge. The more often you return to this place, the more you realize your inner voice is not a fixed script. It is a conversation, and you are allowed to change the tone, speaking truthfully to yourself, even about difficult emotions or flaws, initiates inner harmony rather than repression. Most people spend their lives running from aspects of themselves they find unacceptable. They suppress anger, jealousy, fear, inadequacy, anything that doesn't fit the image they want to present to the world or even to themselves. But what is repressed does not disappear. It hides. It burrows into the unconscious, and from there it influences thoughts, choices, behaviors, and relationships in subtle yet powerful ways. It emerges in dreams, slips of the tongue, impulsive reactions, or patterns that repeat without explanation. Denying these aspects does not protect you, it fragments you. To integrate the self, you must first see the self in full. That means having the courage to name what exists within without judgment. When you feel envy, instead of masking it with forced positivity or shame, you can admit it. Yes, I feel envy. That simple act of acknowledgement brings the emotion into conscious awareness. It gives it a place, a voice, and once something is seen clearly, it can be understood, managed, and transformed. The emotion loses its power to control you from the shadows. It becomes a message, not a monster. This practice of truthful self-talk does not mean indulging every thought or feeling. It does not mean glorifying your wounds or making excuses for harmful behavior. It means approaching the totality of your inner world with honesty and compassion. Instead of saying, "I shouldn't feel this way," you say, "I do feel this way. Why?" You become curious about your reactions, your triggers, your habits. You listen instead of suppress, and in doing so, you become whole. There is a part of you that holds the traits you reject, the insecurities, the rage, the selfishness, the chaos, but that part is not your enemy. It is simply unknown, and what is unknown often appears frightening. When you begin to talk to yourself with truth, when you say, "This is who I am right now, and I'm willing to face it," you shine light into those corners. You begin to integrate what was exiled. This process of integration leads to authenticity. No longer are you acting from a place of avoidance or projection. You begin to respond to life, not react to it. Truthful self-talk is not always comfortable. In fact, it often begins in discomfort, but that discomfort is the doorway to transformation. When you tell yourself the truth, "I am afraid of being alone," or "I sabotage opportunities because I don't believe I deserve them," you make a radical step towards self-mastery. You bring unconscious patterns into the light of consciousness. You stop lying to yourself to feel temporarily safe and begin relating to yourself as you truly are. This allows for real change, because change can only happen where there is clarity. The harmony you seek within cannot be created by rejecting pieces of yourself. It comes when those pieces are acknowledged, understood, and invited back into the circle. Talking to yourself truthfully, especially about what's difficult, is the first act of self-respect. It is the act that says, "I see you, all of you," and that kind of seeing is the beginning of peace. Your words create the self you become. Every phrase you repeat to yourself, whether out loud or silently, becomes a kind of internal mantra, an affirmation or a curse. Over time, these words settle into the deeper layers of the psyche and begin to form beliefs, and beliefs shape perception, reaction, and ultimately identity. What you say to yourself is not just commentary on your life. It is the script you live by. If you constantly repeat, "I'm not good at this," or "people don't like me," then those ideas, even if once untrue, become self-fulfilling. The psyche adapts to match the dominant narrative. Your mind, seeking coherence, begins to bend reality to fit those internal stories. This is not simply about positive thinking or empty affirmations. It is about recognizing that words are not neutral. They carry emotional energy, psychological weight, and symbolic power. Repeating negative thoughts, especially ones rooted in shame, fear, or unworthiness, conditions the nervous system into a chronic state of contraction. It tells your body to brace for rejection, to expect failure, to remain small, and over time, your behavior reflects that inner tension. You avoid risks, you silence your desires, you stop dreaming freely. The self begins to shrink in response to the message it hears the most. But just as negative self-talk builds a prison, compassionate and empowering self-talk opens doors. When you begin to say things like, "I am capable of handling this," or "I am still learning," and that's okay. You offer your mind and body a new experience. A new pattern begins to take form. The voice within starts to become less critical, more supportive, and with that support comes strength, creativity, and courage. You start to believe in your ability to adapt and grow, not because of wishful thinking, but because the message you've given yourself over time has laid the foundation for belief. The repetition of self-affirming thoughts doesn't deny reality, it expands it. It creates space for possibilities beyond the fear-based identity you may have carried for years. It allows you to challenge the voice that says, "I'm stuck," and replace it with, "I haven't found the way yet, but I will." The difference between these two statements is more than just words. It is the difference between resignation and resilience. Words also act as signals to your unconscious mind. They direct attention, set expectations, and influence how you interpret events. If your inner dialogue is harsh, you are more likely to see rejection where there is neutrality, or criticism where there is feedback. If your inner dialogue is gentle and curious, you are more likely to find meaning in challenges and lessons in failure. In this way, your internal speech becomes the architecture of your reality. What you say to yourself, even in quiet moments, is not without consequence. It becomes how you treat yourself in times of stress, how you motivate yourself when you're tired, how you forgive yourself when you fall short. It becomes how you define your value, and over time, those definitions turn into decisions. Your self-talk influences who you become, not as a one-time act, but as an ongoing creation. Your deeper self is always listening. Beneath the surface of your conscious mind lies a vast and powerful realm, the unconscious. It is not silent, nor is it passive. It records, stores, reacts, and influences your behavior more than you often realize. And while the unconscious does not speak in the same language as your waking thoughts, it listens carefully to everything you say to yourself. The tone of your self-talk, the words you repeat, the beliefs you reinforce through internal dialogue. These things sink deep, imprinting themselves in the inner world, where your instincts, habits, emotions, and dreams are shaped. This inner world is not abstract. It's real and alive. It is the reason why someone who constantly tells themselves, "I'm a failure," begins to approach life with hesitation, to pull back before they even try, to feel tension in their body when facing challenges. The unconscious, having absorbed that repeated message, acts as though it is true. It begins to filter experience to support that belief. It notices only what confirms the failure and disregards evidence of success. This is not manipulation, it's a survival mechanism. The unconscious seeks to maintain consistency between your inner narrative and your outer world. This is why intentional self-talk matters so much. When you speak kindly to yourself, when you say, "I am worthy of love," or "I can face difficulty with strength," you're not just trying to boost your mood. You are communicating with the deepest layers of your mind, offering it new material to work with. You are replacing old, fear-based scripts with conscious, chosen ones. Over time, these messages take root. They begin to reshape how the unconscious responds to life. Instead of interpreting uncertainty as danger, it may begin to see it as an opportunity. Instead of bracing for rejection, it may start to open toward connection. The unconscious is also the source of your creativity, your intuition, your spontaneous insights. When you feed it with harsh words, it becomes defensive and rigid. But when you speak to it with respect, it becomes more fluid, more alive. Your dreams begin to shift. Your sense of timing, instinct, and inner guidance sharpens. You become more in tune with your inner wisdom, not because you forced it, but because you created the conditions for it to rise. You may not always hear the voice of your unconscious, but it is always hearing you. It hears when you say, "I'll never be good enough," and it begins to look for ways to protect you from that pain, even if it means keeping you small. It also hears when you say, "I'm learning," and "That's powerful," and it begins to open doors inside you that had long been locked. There is a feedback loop between your conscious mind and your unconscious. What you say out loud or silently becomes the raw data your unconscious uses to build your perception of the world. This isn't magic. It's psychology, it's biology, and it's something you can begin to influence. You don't have to understand every layer of your inner world to change it. You just have to begin by speaking differently, gently, clearly, repeatedly. The rest will follow. When you speak from the soul rather than from the confines of the ego, you access a mode of communication that prioritizes authenticity, compassion, and a deeper understanding of who you truly are. This form of self-talk recognizes that the ego thrives on comparison, validation from external sources, and fear-based narratives that often distort the truth of your inner experiences. In contrast, self-talk emanating from the soul is rooted in a profound sense of self-awareness and purpose that transcends the superficial judgments and insecurities that the ego often instills. It is about engaging in a conversation with yourself that honors your inherent worth, celebrates your unique journey, and acknowledges both your strengths and vulnerabilities without the need for constant external approval. This approach invites you to reconnect with your inner wisdom, a place that holds memories, emotions, and aspirations that are integral to your authentic self, yet are too often muffled by the ego's incessant demands for perfection and validation. When you engage in soulful self-talk, you are essentially filtering your thoughts through the lens of compassion and genuine understanding. Instead of letting your inner dialogue be dictated by the ego's harsh critiques and unrealistic comparisons, you allow a quieter, more nurturing voice to emerge, one that is mindful of your experiences and attuned to your true nature. In this process, you begin to replace the fear-driven narratives with affirmations that resonate with your personal truth. For instance, rather than focusing on perceived shortcomings by thinking, "I must do better," or "I will never be enough," you can redirect your internal conversation towards, "I am learning and evolving at my own pace, and I honor every step of my journey." This subtle shift does not imply ignoring challenges or denying personal responsibility. Rather, it is an invitation to acknowledge your experiences fully, both the joys and the struggles, while cultivating a sense of inner peace that is independent of external circumstances. The depth of soulful self-talk lies in its ability to see beyond the immediate frustrations and insecurities that the ego often amplifies. It allows you to accept the imperfections inherent in being human while still striving towards personal growth. This kind of dialogue encourages you to explore your motives, aspirations, and the values that define you, without the ego's incessant need to label or judge every thought. In doing so, you begin to dismantle the barriers built by self-critical voices, and instead nurture a space where healing, creativity, and authenticity can flourish. Over time, as this nurturing self-talk becomes habitual, you may notice a significant change in the way you perceive both yourself and the world around you. The shift from ego-centered self-talk to soulful communication fosters a sense of inner alignment, where actions and thoughts are no longer driven by fear of inadequacy, but by a genuine desire to connect with your most authentic self. The process of transitioning from ego-driven dialogue to speaking from the soul is both deliberate and transformational. It involves a conscious decision to pay attention to the tone and content of your inner monologue and to actively reframe negative or self-limiting statements into expressions of acceptance and love. This ongoing practice challenges you to be honest about your needs and emotions, encouraging you to treat yourself with the same kindness and understanding that you would offer a cherished friend. As you cultivate this compassionate inner dialogue, you may find that the persistent need for external validation diminishes, replaced by a deep-seated confidence that emerges from knowing who you are at the core. 3 days of intentional self-talk can disrupt years of unconscious programming. This might seem like a bold claim, but within the structure of the psyche, time does not unfold in a linear, mechanical fashion. What matters most is intensity, presence, and repetition. The human mind is not a static container. It is plastic, ever-evolving, and responsive to new patterns of thought. The unconscious, though deep and complex, is not impervious to change. When you engage in focused, consistent self-talk, deliberately choosing words that reflect your higher self, you begin to loosen the old frameworks that have silently shaped your behavior for years. You pull the roots of limiting beliefs out from the soil of your inner world. And even in that brief span of 3 days, you can begin to plant something radically different. Many people live under the illusion that transformation takes a lifetime of effort or external circumstances to align perfectly. But the truth is, the beginning of transformation is always internal. The shift starts the moment you become aware of your inner monologue and consciously decide to change its tone. In the course of 3 focused days, if you speak to yourself with the seriousness and devotion you would offer to a close companion in need, your entire system begins to respond. You may feel strange at first, even resistant. The old patterns will try to reassert themselves. They are familiar, after all. But with each kind word, each new affirmation, each moment of honesty and compassion, you begin to chip away at the armor that has kept you stuck. The ego may resist this change because it sees identity as fixed, but the soul recognizes it as a return home. These 3 days are not about reciting generic affirmations without feeling. They are about truth spoken with presence, telling yourself, "I am here for me. I am no longer judging myself with yesterday's eyes," or "I am choosing to be on my own side," is not a surface-level practice. It is a psychological and spiritual reorientation. Each time you speak these words, you disrupt the automatic loops of self-criticism, fear, or shame. You interrupt the momentum of a belief system that may have operated unquestioned for years, and in that interruption there is power. That power is what allows the nervous system to calm, the mind to refocus, and the heart to begin opening again. Repetition is the language of the unconscious. What you repeat with emotion is what the psyche believes. So if for 3 days you consistently feed your inner world with affirming, honest, and empowering language, your unconscious begins to record that as a new baseline. It begins to rewire associations. It hears your words not as fantasy but as instruction. It adjusts, and then so do your thoughts, your emotions, your behaviors. This 3-day process is a threshold. It is not the end, but it is a catalyst. It shows you that change is possible, not because everything around you changes, but because you began treating yourself differently. You began to speak differently, and in doing so, you signaled to your entire being that you are no longer abandoning yourself to the voices of the past. You are reclaiming the narrative. You are writing a new script, not to deny your history, but to evolve beyond its limitations. The voice you choose to listen to and the voice you choose to embody become one. And that voice, when chosen with intention, becomes your path forward. You do not need a lifetime to begin healing, just the willingness to be present with yourself for a few sacred moments each day. When you speak to yourself with honesty, with gentleness, with strength, you send ripples through every layer of your being. The words you choose become the architecture of your identity, the bridge between the person you've been and the one you're becoming. You're not just talking, you're awakening, remembering the self that exists beyond fear and comparison. This voice, your voice, is not a whisper from the outside world. It's the echo of your soul asking to be heard again. Speak to yourself like this for just 3 days, not to fix yourself, but to finally meet yourself. And once you do, you'll realize you were never lost. You were only waiting to be spoken to with love. So, if for 3 days you consistently feed your inner world with affirming, honest, and empowering language, your unconscious begins to record that as a new baseline. It begins to rewire associations. It hears your words not as fantasy, but as instruction. It adjusts, and then so do your thoughts, your emotions, your behaviors. This 3-day process is a threshold. It is not the end, but it is a catalyst. It shows you that change is possible, not because everything around you changes, but because you began treating yourself differently. You began to speak differently, and in doing so, you signaled to your entire being that you are no longer abandoning yourself to the voices of the past. You are reclaiming the narrative. You are writing a new script, not to deny your history, but to evolve beyond its limitations. The voice you choose to listen to and the voice you choose to embody become one. And that voice, when chosen with intention, becomes your path forward. You do not need a lifetime to begin healing, just the willingness to be present with yourself for a few sacred moments each day. When you speak to yourself with honesty, with gentleness, with strength, you send ripples through every layer of your being. The words you choose become the architecture of your identity, the bridge between the person you've been and the one you're becoming. You're not just talking, you're awakening, realigning, remembering the self that exists beyond fear and comparison. This voice, your voice, is not a whisper from the outside world. It's the echo of your soul asking to be heard again. Speak to yourself like this for just 3 days. Not to fix yourself, but to finally meet you. And once you do, you'll realize you were never lost. You were only waiting to be spoken to with love.